Hello and welcome to Week 11 in Introduction to Psychology. As we are approaching the end of the semester here, we're into Chapter 13 and Chapter 14. Chapter 13 is probably for many of you, maybe an introduction to a new field within psychology, and that's industrial organizational psychology, or the application of psychological principles into the workplace. And it is quite amazing how much psychology there is that goes into scheduling breaks, into arranging workplaces when you're manufacturing and putting things together, and even the entire field of human resources and how we pay people and how often we pay them have all been the subject of psychological research. And then we look into Chapter 14, stress, lifestyle, health, those kinds of things. Major contributors now, psychology is to the field of healthcare. So when we look at IO psychology, or industrial organizational psychology, I actually introduce you pretty early in there to the notion that every workplace has two cultures. Now, it's going to be very tempting when I ask you to describe formal and informal culture within the workplace, to talk about places where you may have worked, things are very informal, and places where you've worked or you've been or you've heard of that are very formal. But that's not what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about the differences between workplaces. I'm talking about that every workplace has both a formal and informal component to it. The formal part is all the training, the videos, the orientation, the organizational chart, all of those things that are officially part of learning how to do the job. The informal part comes when you get to know people and you start to get the inside scoop as to what's going on. You learn, for example, how to arrange things so that you can serve people faster. You learn where things are really kept, even though the manual is here. And you learn that person that you're working with that doesn't do anything is actually the boss's daughter. So you really can't do anything about it. None of that exists within the formal culture. You learn that through social interaction with your coworkers. That's why social interaction is so important. In my field, working with persons with disability, oftentimes individuals with disability going into the workplace had clear access to the formal culture, but because the informal culture was actually accessed through informal social interactions, making friends and getting to know people and people telling you the secrets of the job. For all the reasons that individuals with disabilities run into barriers to things, they also ran into barriers to be included in that informal structure. So often, if somebody was not successful or somebody wasn't happy, or maybe they ran into trouble all the time, was because they were not aware or made aware of that informal culture. So as a professional, it was very important for me to work with organizations to find out what that informal culture was. Now, the other thing that we're going to be looking at that I introduced to you in IO psychology is Gilbert's behavioral engineering model. And that is a problem-solving rubric that takes a look at performance factors that are both environmental and personal, that occupy areas of materials, skill, and capacity and motivation. Those factors, you can look, there's a chart that I introduce you to, and you can take a problem situation and analyze it in each one of those squares, where it's an environmental problem or it's an individual problem, and you can diagnose. It's sort of a diagnostic tool to go through all the factors that contribute to really good performance. And so that's a tool for you. In my face-to-face class, I went over the information literacy paper, going through each one of those squares as to, if somebody hadn't done that yet, then what was getting in the way? What was the part that was getting in the way? Sometimes it was stuff on my end, building the structure of the class, and sometimes it was on the student's end. So it made for a really, really interesting conversation. So that's the IO chapter. The next one takes a really strong look at the role that psychology is now playing in the field of health sciences. Our habits, our eating, drinking, sleeping, exercising, self-care kind of stuff, being around other people. This has all come to the front over the last 20 years, but no more so than over the last 3 years through the pandemic, when separation from other people and isolation really, really wreaked havoc on our society. Not only the economic challenges and the job challenges and sometimes people losing their work and whatnot, but there was also the extreme isolation. So for this particular chapter, I'm going to have you look at stress management. Now, by doing this, I'm having you take a test that lists off major life changes that can happen and the kind of stress points that they're worth. This is not a really, really good way to measure stress, but it's a good first step in understanding what's going on in your life that increases your stress. You'll notice on this list that positive things are there too, because those also, even though they're good, they're adding to stress. Get a great new job, or you have a new relationship or something like that. That's it. It includes some stress, but it's positive. That's just the first measure. The other thing to consider is, regardless of how many points you get from that particular test, you would have to ask the question, well, how am I managing that? So one thing is to have stress and have stressful things happen, but then the other factor is, how am I dealing with that? How am I processing the emotional part of it? How am I taking responsibility for the behavioral part of it that's mine? How am I holding other people responsible for the behavioral component that's theirs? How am I seeking social connections in order to talk about these things with other people? That was the biggest part of the pandemic. Not being able to have that one-to-one type of conversation as readily, at least not physically. So one thing is the stress, and the indicator will say, it affects your immune system, and this is the likelihood that you're going to have a breakdown and stuff like that. But that's a weird and non-valid sort of declaration, because how well you manage that stress is as important as how much of that stress you have. For this particular discussion, I'm having you take the stress test and then discuss the point that you have. And if you have a lot of points, how are you keeping it together? What are you doing to make sure that you can go day to day and thrive even though you're undergoing all of these changes? Now, the classes that I have in this sequence here are out of sequence. The other two classes that I have, there's two classes that I have that have already done this. And what I discovered was the test that I have for stress that's in the course book is geared very much toward adults. So my two high school classes have the challenge of, the one that took it already was like, this doesn't work. It doesn't really measure. So I found another one. I found a teen stress test. The link to that particular test is in the course timeline in Brightspace. It's not in the course book. You can still take the course book one, but it's possible that the teen one that looks at the kind of changes that someone might encounter while they're in high school might be a better test of your current stressful situation. So I responded to that. There's now another test, and so you can take that one instead of the one that's in the course book. All right, so this is a fun time to kind of look at problem solving from the point of view of Gilbert's behavioral engineering model, looking at a formal, informal culture, and getting to know that whole field of IO psychology, a really, really fascinating field. And then connected to that problem solving thing is your stress, and maybe for many of you, celebrating the fact that you're actually still holding it together. That's it's something to recognize when you have a lot of things going on. Yes, don't want to do that for too long. You want to take care of yourself. You want to limit your commitments to what you can handle and whatnot. But when stressful situations come along, sometimes we rise and meet the challenge, and I would expect that many of you are doing that as I speak. So enjoy talking about how well you are managing the amount of stress that you're having. So I look forward to those discussions in the course book. And look forward to those discussions this week. Have a great week. We're nearing the very end of this semester. Only one more week after this one. So finish strong. I look forward to this. Have a great week.